Hey there everybody, Sage Popham here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism, and in today's post going to be sharing with you a topic that is really something that I'm really passionate about, and that is talking about vitalism and how it's really common in the herbal world, when people are looking at kind of vitalist approaches to herbal medicine, vitalist traditions, that they immediately think that vitalism is really solely something associated with herbalism. And in this post, I'm here to tell you that it's not, that vitalism is not just about herbal medicine. But before I get into that, I just said the word vitalism like 5 times, and some of you might be like, I don't even know what that word means. Like, what is vitalism? So before I jump into how vitalism is not just about herbalism, I kind of want to define this term a little bit for you all that might not be familiar with it. So this is to me, it was one thing that really kind of revolutionized my approach, not just to herbalism, but as kind of my way of seeing the world around me. And what vitalism is kind of the core principle of it is a way of seeing nature and plants and people and the healing process as that there is an intelligence, right? That there is an intelligence within the natural world, that there is and within the human body, for example, there is an intelligence in our organ systems, in our cells. There is even an intelligence in our symptoms and why we get sick and how we get sick. A really good example of that kind of illustrates how a vitalist thinks is thinking about a fever. So when you get a fever, you get some kind of virus or bacteria or pathogen that gets into your body. Well, the vital intelligence of the body responds to that by, sending signals to your immune system and to your higher regulatory centers of your brain that, closes the pores of the skin, raises the internal body temperature to that temperature that will denature that bacteria or virus and things like that in order to kill it, right? So a fever is a vital response. It's an intelligent response of the body to an invading pathogen. And as a vitalist healer, as a vitalist herbalist, and this using it in the context of herbalism, right? We want to follow that, right? So we want to give remedies that support the vital intelligence of the body and what it's trying to do. And as herbalists, what we usually give is diaphoretic herbs. What do diaphoretic herbs do? They make you sweat, they kind of move that fever along. So in the vitalist approach, we're using our plants and our remedies to support the innate intelligence of the body in doing what it is trying to do. And that is what our diaphoretic remedies do. So that's just an example of a vitalist approach and kind of how we see things, that we move with nature, that we move with what the body is trying to do and use our plants in that way. In contrast to suppressing things, right? And more of an allopathic model, you get a fever, we're like, oh, the fever is the enemy, and take a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug to suppress the fever. But as many people know these days, if you suppress a fever, you're going to prolong it by a number of days. While that fever's suppressed, that virus or bacteria is reproducing, your drug wears off, and you're even more sick than you were before. So vitalism is really about following the intelligence of the body and really having a connection to that intelligence of nature. And so there's a vital force within all things. There's a vital force within the plant. There's a vital force within an ecosystem. There's a vital force within the body. It is this intelligence and consciousness of nature that we learn to listen to. And I always say, the herbalist is first, foremost, and forever a student of nature. And I think that is a really core principle of what a vitalist does, is we study nature and we see how nature informs us about our own bodies, our own minds, our own health. It informs us about how our plants function, how our plants heal, and ultimately makes us a better herbalist, a better healer, because nature is where all of our medicine comes from, and we as humans are nature. And so the more we study nature externally, the more we understand nature internally. And that is a really core principle of vitalism. So when we're looking at herbal traditions from around the world, a lot of those traditions are rooted in a vitalist approach. Of course, they have different names for it. That's kind of more the Western traditional terminology of this approach, but Ayurveda is an inherently vitalist approach to healing. Chinese medicine is totally a vitalist approach to healing. Homeopathy, physiomedicalism, eclecticism, Greek medicine is a vitalist approach, right? Looking at constitutions, looking at herbal energetics. These are all ways that a vitalist thinks. But as I said, vitalism is not just about herbalism. And so one of the things that I like to think about with this is that at its core, vitalism is a mode of perception. I think that's one of the main ways we can think about it outside the scope of herbal medicine, is that vitalism is a way that we see the world. It's a way that you look at things. It's a way that you perceive things in terms of living in accordance with nature. So the vitalist is, as I said, a student of nature. Well, how do we study nature? Well, I think there's kind of 3 layers to this that are good to observe. The first is understanding the seasons and seeing how the changing of the seasons externally changes our internal seasons, right? The vitalist has a mode of perception that sees how nature in the outside world affects the nature of the inside world within a person. And so we see how the changing of the seasons affects our health and affects our mind and affects how we live in accordance with that, right? We're going to talk about that a lot more in a future post, so be sure to keep your eyes on that in terms of the vitalist approach to living in harmony with the seasons and with the daily rhythms. But paying attention to the seasons is a big part of that. The weather, right? Anyone that lives here in the Pacific Northwest, as I do, the weather affects us. I mean, if you get clouds and rain for 6 months straight, it's gonna make you feel a little melancholic, right? But there's a lot of folks out there too but boy, that damp weather comes and all of a sudden my arthritis flares up, or oh boy, here comes that heat of summer and my rash kind of gets aggravated, or whatever it might be. So again, seeing how nature affects us. And then of course, ecosystems, wherever our habitat is, where we live, directly influences our health and well-being. So this is one thing that the vitalist does, is that we pay attention, right? We pay attention and learn from nature. And this has a lot of greater implications in terms of just seeing the interconnectedness of everything and how our health is not just isolated in terms of just within ourselves, but that there's outside forces that are affecting our health. And when we learn to pay attention to see what those influences are in terms of especially seasons, ecosystems, and the weather, we can learn a lot about ourselves. So vitalism is ultimately a way of living in accordance with nature. The other approach that I think shows us how vitalism is outside of herbalism is really thinking about, well, what is vitality? Right? If we think of our own being and we think of how vital do you feel? And what does that mean? What does it mean to be vital? Well, I think there's a lot of qualities and characteristics about having good vitality that we can see in people, right? I mean, first off is how much energy do you have, right? Are you kind of dragging ass and sluggish and hard fatigued and hard to get out of bed in the morning? Well, if that's the case, then you're probably not very vital, right? I think there's a glow to the skin, to the eyes, to the awareness. There is an emotional, a capacity to deal with and process one's emotions in a healthy way in the vital person. the vital person, there's a certain clarity of mind, focus, cognition, good memory in the vital person. So these are kind of some of the qualities of what it means to be vital and healthy and vibrant, have that really good energy about you. But what determines that? Like, what determines our core vitality? Is it what herbs you take? I mean, that can influence it, but this is just a way, like, vitalism is beyond just herbal medicine. So what determines our core vitality? Well, one of the first things is our genetics, right? So we, based on, the genes of our mother and our father, definitely predisposes us to having a certain degree of vitality within our being. And I think this also translates into our constitution. I think our constitution and genetics, play off of one another, but I also do believe that there's a little bit of difference there because things like weather, seasons, ecosystem affect our constitution, but those don't exactly change our genetics. But some people are born with a really vital, strong constitution. Others are born with a little bit of a more sensitive, I guess for lack of a better term, weaker constitution. And of course, these are things that we can't necessarily change. And this is what in Chinese medicine we would say is like our jing, like our inherited jing, like how much juice do we have? How much vitality do we have on that core fundamental level? And that's kind of like hardwired into our being. Then from there, we have the vitality that we receive on a daily basis from the things that we require as a human to, stay alive, being food, fluids, right? So the vitality that we draw from our foods. And this is two sides of that. One is the actual food that is ingested, right? Is it high vitality food? Is it fresh? Is it clean? Is it nutrient dense? Or is it, maybe heavily processed and, empty calories and not a lot of nutrition there? So there's the food part of that. On the flip side of it, there is your digestion. Digestion is huge in vitalist systems and approaches to healing because that's where we're getting our vitality from on a daily basis is our food and our ability, not just our food, but our ability to digest, absorb, assimilate the foods and the nutrients that we eat. So I remember, one of my teachers from Bastyr said, there's that saying, you are what you eat, but it's not really true. It's more you are what you assimilate. And I remember that it really struck me, or I was like, wow, that shows it's like you can eat the best, highest quality, organic, locally grown, nutrient dense, permacultured, biodynamically, food, the most amazing food in the world. But if your digestion is not optimal, you're not going to be able to extract the vitality and the nutrition from those foods. So I always say like food, fluids, and digestion, these are ways that we get our vitality and how we build our vitality throughout our daily life. And this is why in many vitalist traditions of medicine, we see that there is a very strong focus on digestive health. And I think this could not be any more pertinent today than it is today, in this modern world of foods that have never existed in terms of genetic modification and the drastic reduction in nutrients in the food due to poor farming practices and artificial food products and just the food thing, antibiotic trauma to the gut, adversely affecting digestion, food intolerance, and all this stuff with the gut. I mean, I feel like the gut has been the talk of the town for a number of years now, and it's true. It's very, very important. And many vitalist systems of medicine really see that the gut, your digestion, is the root of the vital tree. And if the gut and digestion is impaired, everything will suffer, right? In the same way in a fruit tree, if the roots are not healthy, it's not going to grow and it's not going to produce as good a fruit as a tree that has really good, healthy roots. And so I like to think of the root of a tree as like our digestive system, and the soil that that root is growing in is the environment, is like the food and the nutrients that are made available to it. So these are the things that determine our core vitality. Obviously water, and I always like to say fluids because it's like water and oil are the two ways that our system is hydrated. And then last on this point is sleep and rest. This is how we rejuvenate and recharge on a daily basis. This is, what's one sign of vitality? A lot of people would say probably energy. And well, what happens when we don't have energy? Well, we feel tired. What should we do when we're tired? Sleep. And that's a vitalist approach, is when you're tired, sleep. It's a vital response. It's an intelligent response of the body to say, hey, it's time to stop and slow down and rest. Now, of course, that's really taboo to say in our modern world. It's like we're taught to push ourselves and to work until we're all burned out. And I think it's just important that we recognize the importance and the medicine of adequate rest and sleep. This is how our nervous system rejuvenates, our hormones, our liver. So much of our physical rejuvenation is happening while we are resting. And I think there's a balance with sleep, though. There is such a thing of, in my opinion, too much sleep. If anyone's ever, woken up in the morning and maybe you're like feeling pretty alert and aware, but you're like, oh, I'll just roll over and get a little more sleep. And you roll over, you fall back asleep, and then you wake up and you're like super groggy and out of it. And, there's kind of an edge there where too much is not good as well. So there's a balance with our rest and the way that sleep does rejuvenate and rebuild our vitality. And this is why a big premise of so many protocols and things like that for people with endocrine and nervous system exhaustion and burnout is actually rest therapy, where people need to kind of rejuvenate themselves through the healing power of sleep and rest. So these are some of the things that determine our core vitality. And if you notice, a lot of that is really outside the sphere of herbal medicine. And this is what leads into the next kind of main point that I wanted to make here, which is there's a point where, as an herbalist, we have to recognize where herbs aren't always enough, that herbs aren't always the magic bullet, that holistic herbalism is much more than just using plants. And what I mean by this is that if we look at vitalist traditions of medicine, that they incorporate many approaches and remedies for healing of people. Some examples of this would be things like diet and food and nutrition, right? That certainly food, if we can think of one thing that determines our state of health or lack of health, a lot of times it can come down to the food that we eat every day. And this is why, if we look at Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, even systems of Western medicine, traditional Western medicine, that food and diet was a huge part of it. Okay, we're gonna put you on a look at Greek medicine. They were super into fasting. Hippocratic medicine, they were really into fasting and cleansing and things like that. Ayurveda, of course, has become very, popular in terms of panchakarma and their cleansing protocols, in that there is an approach to food and diet that is very, very healing. And certainly, as I was mentioning earlier, with the whole state of food in our modern world, I believe every herbalist needs to, at the very least, be a decent nutritionist, and not in the sense of counting calories and, having it be like mathematical, but, to me, it's more learning how to coach people and yourself in what it means to have just a healthy relationship to food and to eat a good natural diet. As much as you possibly can. Certainly, I know that it's not there's, I think more socio-political issues around access and availability for people to have access to good food. But in general, the point I guess that I'm trying to make is that diet and food and nutrition is a major part of vitalist systems of medicine, and that's really beyond what we tend to think of as herbalism. So a really good example of this is how there are a number of conditions that can be healed by the removal of a food intolerance or a food allergy. A lot of autoimmune conditions, chronic digestive issues, a lot of joint pain, even things like fatigue, anxiety, depression. Sometimes those things are triggered by a food. And it doesn't matter how many herbs you give them to calm them down, or how many anti-inflammatories you give them, or how many digestive remedies you give them. If it's a food they're eating causing the problem, then the herbs aren't enough. Similar thing is true with nutrient deficiencies. If someone has, say, for example, a lot of muscle spasms and tension and constriction, and maybe they're also, maybe they're a little nervous, anxious, and things like that. If that's all because of a magnesium deficiency, again, it doesn't matter how many antispasmodics and nervines and sedatives you give them. If it's because of a nutrient deficiency, the herbs aren't going to cut it alone. And so this is why, from my perspective, vitalism, the vitalist approach is beyond just using herbs and has to incorporate things like diet, things like nutrition, things like your lifestyle, and considering things like your sleep, like your stress management, like your emotional and mental health. Many vitalist traditions incorporate approaches such as fasting, rejuvenation protocols, ways of balancing and maintaining and strengthening your constitution. And so there's a larger ecosystem to the vitalist approach to medicine and healing, that of which herbalism is just one facet of. And I mention this because, as I said earlier, that vitalism really is about a way of living in accordance with nature. And I think that as herbalists, this is one thing that, well, first we need to learn how to do ourselves as best we can, and living in harmony with the cycles of the seasons and the daily rhythms and the weather and the ecosystem in which we live and things like that. But that's also something that we can coach and train and support our clients in doing, in terms of understanding their own unique nature and how to, live their life in a way that will help support their unique constitutional balance, their unique inner ecosystem, so to speak, through giving them really great, manageable, quick, easy to implement tools that just support their health and well-being. And I think that's one of the last important points that I really like to make about a vitalist approach to healing, is that we don't have to wait until we're sick in order to work with holistic medicine. That there's an approach of not just healing us when we're sick, but rejuvenation, right? That just because we're symptom free doesn't mean we don't have something to work on, that there's things that we can do to further optimize and refine and kind of dial in our health and well-being, so that we're not just symptom or disease free, but that we feel vital, that we feel rejuvenated, that we feel that good energy when we wake up in the morning, that we have happiness in our heart, that we have clarity in our mind, that we have something, greater that we're striving towards, that we're working towards, a goal or an aspiration or a dream that we're reaching for, that we ultimately, I think, have a higher purpose, that we have the energy and the vitality to heal our trauma, to heal our past, to overcome the struggles and the trials and the tribulations that we face, and that we're not so exhausted and burned out and that we just can't handle anything, and it all kind of like just washes over us, and there's like we're just floundering. The Vitalist approach is about being able to face our life and move through our life with strength and with humility and with compassion and with the ability to look at ourselves and heal ourselves and ultimately become the best version of ourselves, because I think that's what nature wants. That's what the earth wants. That's what we as a part of nature and the earth need for ourselves, to heal ourselves on a deeper level and to ultimately contribute to, in our own way, maybe in our own little corner, make this world a little bit of a better place, even if that's just being kind to people, So these are just some of my thoughts on vitalism and how it reaches beyond herbal medicine, and how hopefully you can start to think a little more holistically, especially for those of you that are working with clients. Start incorporating some of these other approaches into your work in terms of some of the things that I looked at, or just for yourself, think about that harmony with nature and what maybe you can do to live in greater accordance with the natural world. And be sure to keep an eye on your inbox, because in the next few weeks, I'm going to be sending some more posts about vitalism, and specifically we're going to talk a little bit about that process of kind of harmonizing with the natural world, and some very practical, daily, simple practices that you can do in order to do that. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining me in this episode. Give me a like and a subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or subscribe if you're listening to the podcast. Head on over to our blog at evolutionaryherbalism.com for more free training, mini courses, resources, all sorts of great stuff going on over there. And just really appreciate you joining me here. And until the next one, take care and be well.